Silence isn't weakness. Silence is the one move that can turn their confidence into fear. And once you understand how to use it, you'll never look at conversations, arguments, or even relationships the same way again. Most men think the way to prove themselves is through words. They argue back, they explain, they justify, they try to win attention or validation. But here's the truth. Every time you overtalk, you give away your power. You hand control over to the person in front of you. That's why so many men feel drained after endless debates or text chains. They think they're showing strength, but in reality, they're showing dependence. Silence flips that script. When you stop reacting, when you hold back your words, something fascinating happens. Suddenly, they're left alone with their thoughts. They begin to question themselves. They wonder if they've lost influence over you. And the very confidence they once used to control the situation starts to crumble. This isn't about playing games. It's about mastering yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Silence is how you show that mastery. Instead of chasing, you create space. Instead of explaining, you build respect. And in that space, their mind fills with uncertainty, and that uncertainty becomes your advantage. Today, you're going to learn how silence, when used with Stoic discipline, becomes the most powerful tool you'll ever have. Let's get into it. Number 1. Silence that shatters their control. When someone thinks they own the frame, when they believe they have the upper hand, the last thing they expect is silence. Most men underestimate how powerful it is to say nothing. But silence doesn't mean weakness. In fact, it's the one move that flips the balance of power. The moment you stop responding, the moment you hold your tongue, you take away their favorite weapon, control. Here's why. Control thrives on reaction. If they criticize you and you snap back, they control your emotions. If they tease you and you explain yourself, they control your frame. If they push your buttons and you defend yourself, they control the rhythm of the exchange. But when you refuse to play the game, when you meet words with silence, suddenly their strategy collapses. They're left facing themselves, and that's when their confidence cracks. Think about it in real life. Mark, 48, from Texas, was in a relationship with a woman named Jessica, 45. Jessica had a habit of throwing little tests at him, sarcastic comments, small digs, trying to get a rise out of him. In the past, Mark would argue back. He thought that by defending himself, he was standing strong. But every time he did, the conversation spiraled into tension. Then one evening, during dinner, Jessica made a sharp remark about his career. Instead of biting back, Mark simply looked at her, held eye contact, and stayed silent. The energy shifted instantly. Jessica fidgeted. She repeated herself, this time with less bite. Within minutes, she changed the subject. Mark didn't win by arguing, he won by holding the frame through silence. This is what makes silence so destructive to the illusion of control. People who rely on your reaction don't know what to do when it disappears. Their confidence isn't built on inner strength. It's built on your predictable responses. When you break that pattern, their foundation crumbles. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Silence, in the Stoic sense, isn't just holding your tongue, it's discipline. It's saying, I will not give you the reaction you want because I refuse to hand over control of my emotions. That decision alone creates respect, even if the other person never admits it. Now here's the subtle part that most men miss. Silence doesn't just neutralize control, it amplifies your presence. When you say nothing, your body language, your eye contact, your calmness do all the talking. That calm energy communicates strength far louder than words ever could. Mark later told a friend that his silence that night was the turning point. Jessica never tried that same tactic again. Why? Because she learned something important. She couldn't control him. And once a woman realizes she can't control you, she starts to respect you more. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, defend yourself, or overtalk, pause. Remember that silence isn't passive, it's active power. It's how you reclaim the frame and make them question the very confidence they once used against you. If you've ever noticed how silence flipped the power dynamic in your favor, type this in the comments. I hold the frame. And keep watching, because silence doesn't just break control. When used at the right moment, it plants seeds of doubt that grow inside their mind, and that's where we're headed next. Number 2. Doubt that creeps in when you say nothing. Here's the thing about silence. It doesn't just remove their control, it plants seeds of doubt. When you don't answer, when you don't explain, when you don't fill the space, the mind of the other person does the work for you. And what grows inside that silence is often more powerful than anything you could have said out loud. Psychologists have long understood this. The human brain hates uncertainty. When there's a gap in information, we rush to fill it. That's why silence is so unsettling. Instead of hearing your defense, your excuse, or your reaction, they're forced to sit with nothing. And in that nothing, their imagination takes over. Did they push you too far? Did they lose influence? Are you rethinking them entirely? Each second of silence is another layer of doubt eating away at the confidence they once showed. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Think about that for a second. Your silence doesn't have to carry threats or anger. Their imagination will do the heavy lifting. In fact, most of the discomfort they feel isn't from your silence itself. It's from the stories their mind begins to create in the absence of your response. And those stories are always more powerful, more emotional, and more destabilizing than reality. When you stay silent, you create a mirror. They don't see you. They see their own insecurities staring back at them. Every jab they made, every word they threw at you, suddenly echoes louder when it goes unanswered. And with each echo, their certainty starts to crack. This is where silence becomes more than just a tactic. It becomes a discipline. You're no longer just withholding words, you're practicing control. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." You can't stop someone from testing you, mocking you, or trying to dominate you. But you can control your reaction. And when your reaction is silence, you're showing that their words have no access to your inner world. That realization hits harder than any argument could. The beauty of this approach is that it works without force. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to prove anything. The absence of response itself becomes the loudest message. You're saying, without words, "I'm not shaken. I'm not playing your game. I stand where I choose to stand." And here's the paradox: your silence doesn't make you smaller in their eyes. It makes you larger. The less you reveal, the more they wonder. The less you react, the more they question themselves. The less you chase, the more they lean in, searching for clues you refuse to give. Doubt becomes their shadow, and you created it without lifting a finger. So the next time you feel the urge to answer back, remind yourself, silence can speak louder than your best defense. Let their mind run in circles. Let their confidence eat itself alive. Your silence is the spark. Their imagination is the wildfire. If you've ever seen how silence made someone second-guess themselves, type this in the comments. I create doubt. And stay tuned, because while doubt shakes their confidence, silence also proves something deeper. It shows self-mastery. And that's what we'll uncover next. Number 3. Self-mastery that turns confidence into fear. The strongest signal you can ever send in a heated moment is not anger, not shouting, not even clever words, it's self-mastery. When you show that you are in complete control of yourself, while they are losing control, the balance of power shifts instantly. Their confidence, once loud and dominant, begins to turn into fear. Why? because nothing is more intimidating than a man who cannot be rattled. Let's look at a real example. David, 52, from Chicago, was going through a rocky patch with his partner Laura, 49. Laura had a sharp tongue and often tested David's patience with sarcastic remarks. In the past, he would snap back. He thought matching fire with fire showed strength, but every argument left him drained, and Laura seemed to walk away with the upper hand. One evening, during a family gathering, Laura made a biting comment about his habits in front of others. Everyone waited for David's reaction. Instead of firing back, David smiled lightly, stayed silent, and calmly sipped his drink. The room shifted. Laura fidgeted, laughed nervously, and quickly changed the subject. By mastering himself, David had made her feel her own words bouncing back on her. That is the power of self-mastery. It exposes the other person's reliance on your reaction. They feed off your emotions. When you don't provide them, their confidence begins to crack. They realize their influence over you is gone, and that realization unsettles them. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is the Stoic core of self-mastery. You can't control what someone says or how they act, but you can control your own response. And when you choose silence or calm presence, you send the clearest message possible: I am not under your control. The psychology behind this is simple but profound. People expect reactions. They expect you to defend, to explain, to fight back. When you don't, they're left exposed. Their confidence turns inward and mutates into doubt. Instead of standing tall, they begin to wonder why you aren't engaging. That wondering grows into discomfort, then fear. Fear that you've seen through their tactics. Fear that you no longer care. Fear that their words hold no weight. David later admitted that moment changed how Laura treated him. She stopped testing him with public comments. Why? Because his self-mastery proved something words never could. He was no longer a man she could provoke at will. And once she realized that, her confidence in controlling him dissolved. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about refusing to hand over your emotional power. When you master yourself, you create space for respect to grow. And respect, in the long run, is far more attractive than any witty comeback. Self-mastery doesn't make you distant, it makes you steady. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you reliable. And in the eyes of others, especially women, that steadiness is magnetic. It's the opposite of neediness. It's the energy of a man who doesn't have to prove himself with words because his actions and presence say enough. So the next time you're tempted to snap back, pause. Ask yourself, who really holds the power here? The one who reacts or the one who stays composed? Every moment of self-mastery is a silent declaration of strength, and strength, in its quietest form, makes others realize their confidence was never as solid as it seemed. If you've ever felt the power of mastering yourself in tense moments, type this in the comments. I master myself. And keep watching, because while self-mastery breaks their confidence, silence also forces respect in ways words never can. That's what we'll explore next. Number 4. Respect earned by disciplined silence. Most men confuse respect with dominance. They think raising their voice, cutting someone off, or proving a point earns respect. But in reality, respect isn't forced, it's commanded. And one of the strongest ways to command it is through disciplined silence. Here's why. Anyone can stay quiet for a few seconds out of shock or hesitation. That's not discipline, that's passivity. Disciplined silence is a choice. It's when you deliberately hold back, not because you don't have anything to say, but because you know saying less will say more, and people feel the difference. They sense that you're not being silenced, you're in control of the silence. That alone shifts the dynamic. Think about the last heated discussion you witnessed. Who seemed stronger, the person who was flailing around with words, or the one who sat back, calm, measured, and selective about when to speak. It's almost always the latter. We respect those who can hold their ground without scrambling to defend themselves. The Stoics understood this as a form of self-command. Epictetus put it clearly. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. In other words, decide the kind of man you want to be before the heat of the moment arrives. If you want to be respected, you don't let the chaos of others dictate your words. You use silence as a shield and as a signal of strength. Disciplined silence doesn't just keep you composed, it elevates you above the noise. When others throw insults, argue, or seek to provoke, your silence highlights their lack of control. Without lifting a finger, you contrast your steadiness against their volatility, and that contrast builds respect. People may not say it out loud, but they notice. They notice that you don't need to shout to be heard. They notice that you don't need to explain to prove yourself. This respect isn't just external, it's internal too. Every time you practice disciplined silence, you reinforce your own sense of mastery. You prove to yourself that you don't need to rush to defend, that your value isn't tied to constant justification. That inner respect, the respect you give yourself, is the foundation for the respect others will eventually give you. It's worth pointing out that disciplined silence isn't about stonewalling or shutting down communication. It's about timing. It's about choosing when to speak and when to hold back, and always doing so from a place of strength, not fear. When silence is used with discipline, it becomes magnetic. People lean in to hear you. They take your words more seriously when you finally decide to share them. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that it is not necessary for you to have an opinion about everything. That principle applies perfectly here. You don't have to respond to every jab, every accusation, every little test. The more you show that you can stand firm in silence, the more others will recognize that you are not swayed by the winds of outside events. And that recognition, that quiet, sometimes grudging respect, is what separates men who are merely heard from men who are truly remembered. So remember this: respect isn't demanded with words. It's earned in the spaces between them. And when you choose disciplined silence, you position yourself as the man who doesn't just react, he commands. If you've ever felt the respect grow stronger after you stayed silent, type this in the comments. I earn respect. And stay with me, because silence doesn't just earn respect. When used correctly, it can flip the entire power dynamic in your favor. That's what we're exploring next. Number 5. Power shifts when you stop reacting. Power, in relationships, whether personal or professional, isn't always about who speaks the loudest or who gets the last word. More often, it's about who controls the rhythm. The person who sets the pace, who others must adjust to, is the one who holds the real power. And one of the fastest ways to shift that rhythm in your favor is by stopping the cycle of constant reactions. When you react to everything, every comment, every insult, every test, you're playing on their terms. They push, you push back. They pull, you chase. The problem is that as long as you're reacting, you're letting them set the tempo, and when they control the tempo, they control the outcome. But the moment you stop reacting, something dramatic happens. The tempo stops being theirs, it becomes yours. Take Robert, 55, from Arizona. Robert was dating Melissa, 50, who had a sharp sense of humor, but often tested him with cutting remarks. For years, Robert played into it, always defending himself or snapping back. The pattern became predictable. Melissa would jab, Robert would react, and the dynamic always tilted in her favor. But one day, Robert decided to break the cycle. When Melissa threw out a sarcastic line about his career at a dinner party, Robert didn't take the bait. He smiled, stayed quiet, and turned his attention back to the conversation with someone else at the table. That single choice shifted the energy instantly. Melissa lost her leverage. She was no longer in control of the rhythm. because Robert refused to dance to her tune. What happened next was revealing. Instead of feeling victorious, Melissa grew uneasy. She started to wonder why he didn't respond. Was he above it? Did he not care? Had she lost her grip on him? That uncertainty gave Robert the upper hand, not through aggression, but through restraint. By stepping out of the cycle, he took control of the frame. This isn't just anecdotal, it's psychological. People rely on predictable patterns. If they know what button to press to get a rise out of you, they'll keep pressing it. But when the button stops working, the game falls apart. And when the game falls apart, so does their illusion of control. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When you stop reacting, you're proving that their words, their tone, even their attitude don't dictate your state of mind. And that proof shifts the power dynamic more effectively than any verbal comeback ever could. It's also important to note that stopping your reactions doesn't make you passive, it makes you deliberate. You're no longer controlled by the push and pull of the moment. Instead, you decide when to engage and when to hold back. That choice is where true strength lies. And when others sense that strength, respect follows. For Robert, everything changed after that night. Melissa still teased occasionally, but her words carried less weight. The power had shifted not because he silenced her, but because he stopped letting her control him through his reactions. And once that shift happened, the relationship dynamic began to balance out. So ask yourself, how much of your energy is spent reacting to things that don't deserve your reaction? How many times have you handed over control by snapping back too quickly? When you choose not to react, you're not losing power, you're reclaiming it. If you've ever felt the shift when you stopped reacting, type this in the comments. I hold the power. And keep watching, because while silence shifts the balance of power, it also creates space for you to grow stronger, to rise above the noise, and that's exactly where we're going next. Number 6. Space you create that makes you rise higher. One of the most overlooked aspects of silence is the space it creates. We live in a world addicted to noise, arguments, debates, endless scrolling, constant replies. Everyone is trying to fill the air, to prove themselves louder, faster, and more aggressively. But the man who can create space, who doesn't rush to fill silence with words, suddenly rises above the crowd. That space is powerful because it changes the dynamic. It forces others to slow down, to notice you, to adjust to your rhythm. When you don't immediately respond, people begin to wonder. They lean in, they question themselves, they start to weigh their own words more carefully. All of this happens not because you said more, but because you said less. The Stoics understood the value of this. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." The same principle applies in conversations. Most people waste their words. They react impulsively, filling silence with unnecessary explanations, excuses, or emotions. But when you conserve your words, you treat them like gold. And when your words become rare, they carry more weight. The space before and after them becomes part of the message. This space also gives you perspective. Instead of being dragged into someone else's storm, you remain the calm center. The pause gives you time to assess, to reflect, to choose your next step with intention. That composure elevates you. It makes others view you as someone who doesn't just survive pressure but thrives under it. Imagine a heated exchange. One person talks faster and faster, their emotions spilling out. The other person sits calmly, listening, allowing silence to stretch. Who rises higher in that moment? Who commands the room without saying a word? It's always the one who controls the space, and respect flows naturally toward that man. The beauty of this space is that it also creates growth. When you don't react immediately, when you give yourself that gap, you strengthen your discipline. You train yourself to act from principle, not impulse. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, to live according to nature, to act with reason rather than passion. Silence, when used with discipline, becomes that practice in real time. You are proving to yourself that you can rise above noise, that you are guided by something deeper than momentary emotion. And others sense it. They may not understand why, but they feel it. They feel that you operate differently, that you're not trapped in the same reactive cycle they are. And that difference is magnetic. It's what makes people want to follow your lead, respect your boundaries, and see you as a man of substance. The space you create with silence is not emptiness, it's elevation. It's a stage you stand on while others are still scrambling in the crowd. And from that higher ground, you don't need to shout to be heard. Your very presence becomes enough. So remember this: don't fear silence, use it. Create space where others expect noise. Rise higher by stepping back, not by pushing forward. That space is where your strength becomes undeniable. If you've ever experienced how creating space gave you more respect, type this in the comments. I rise higher. And keep watching, because silence not only elevates you, it also forces others to face something they often try to avoid, themselves. And that's where we're headed next. Number 7. The mirror your silence forces them to face. Silence doesn't just take away control, and it doesn't just create space. It also acts as a mirror. When you stop reacting, when you refuse to fill the air with explanations or defenses, the other person is forced to face themselves. And most people don't like what they see. Here's what happens. The moment you go quiet, their words start bouncing back at them. Every jab, every criticism, every attempt to provoke echoes louder because it isn't drowned out by your defense. Instead of battling you, they're left battling their own reflection. And for someone who relies on control, that reflection is uncomfortable. It makes them question not only their confidence in you, but their confidence in themselves. Take Greg, 47, from Ohio. He was in a long-term relationship with Sarah, 44. Sarah often poked at Greg's insecurities, his job, his habits, even the way he handled stress. In the past, Greg always defended himself. He thought if he explained enough, she would back down. But one day, after a sharp comment about his career, Greg stayed silent. He didn't storm off. He didn't argue. He simply looked at her and said nothing. Sarah tried again, repeating the same point, but Greg's silence left her words hanging in the air. Suddenly, she was the one squirming. She was forced to hear her own tone, her own bitterness, and she didn't like it. That's the mirror silence creates. It reflects back the energy someone is putting out. And most of the time, when people see themselves clearly, it's not flattering. The confidence they once wore like armor begins to crack because now they can't ignore the flaws in their own behavior. The Stoics knew this power well. Epictetus taught, when another blames you or hates you, or people voice similar criticisms, go to their souls, penetrate inside and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety that they hold any particular opinion about you. Silence gives you the ability to see them clearly while forcing them to confront themselves. You don't get tangled in their storm, you make them realize they're the only ones creating it. The fascinating part is how quickly this changes dynamics. In Greg's case, Sarah became more careful with her words after that moment. Why? Because silence forced her to hear herself without the distraction of an argument. She had to face the truth that her words were unkind. And in doing so, she also had to face the reality that Greg was no longer playing the role she expected. This is why silence is so unsettling for others. It strips away the shield of back-and-forth arguments and leaves only raw reflection. And while people might resist it in the moment, over time, they come to respect it. They respect the man who doesn't get dragged into petty fights, who doesn't lose himself in proving a point. They respect the mirror he holds up without saying a word. So the next time you feel someone pushing for a reaction, Remember that silence doesn't just protect you, it reveals them. It forces them to hear themselves, to see themselves, and often to rethink how they treat you. That's a mirror few can handle, but one that always commands respect. If you've ever seen someone stumble because your silence reflected their own behavior back at them, type this in the comments. I hold the mirror, and keep watching, because while silence exposes them to themselves, it also gives you the chance to sharpen your own strength in ways that words never could. That's where we're headed next. Number 8. Self-worth revealed in every pause. Silence is more than absence of words. It's a statement in itself. Every pause you choose to make is a declaration of your self-worth. Because when you refuse to rush into explanations, when you're comfortable letting a conversation breathe, you're showing that your value doesn't depend on proving yourself. Think about it. Why do most people talk too much? It's usually to fill gaps of insecurity. They want reassurance, so they explain, justify, or argue. But a man who pauses without fear signals something different. He signals that he doesn't need to win validation. He doesn't need approval to know who he island. His self-worth is already intact, and that calm certainty radiates out in every moment of silence. This is exactly what the Stoics trained themselves for. Epictetus taught, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. The point wasn't to lower yourself, but to free yourself from the grip of others' opinions. When you can pause, when you can stand in silence, even if people misinterpret it, you're showing that their perception doesn't define you. That is self-worth in its purest form. And here's the psychology behind it. Pauses make people uncomfortable when they're insecure, but they become magnetic when you're secure. People lean into your pauses. They feel the weight of your presence more because you're not scrambling for approval. You're letting them sit with the silence, and in that silence, your confidence speaks louder than words. This is why people remember the man who doesn't rush. They remember the one who speaks slowly, intentionally, and leaves room between his words. It's not just about style, it's about what those pauses communicate. They communicate patience. They communicate confidence. They communicate that you don't measure your worth in how fast or how much you speak. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. If your thoughts are frantic, your speech will be frantic. But if your thoughts are grounded, your speech will be grounded too, and your pauses will carry a presence that others respect. Those pauses are small windows into your inner world, and when that inner world is steady, people feel it. Here's the subtle but powerful effect. Pauses change the way people treat you. When you rush, people sense desperation. When you pause, they sense power. They sense that you're not worried about losing their attention because you know your worth is greater than one moment of silence. And that makes them pay even more attention. In the modern world, where everyone is addicted to fast responses, texting back instantly, filling every silence in conversation, the man who can pause stands out. He shows that he isn't owned by urgency. He shows that he isn't desperate to be understood in every second. Instead, he shows that his value is steady enough to let others come to him. That's why every pause you take is more than a break. It's a mirror of your self-worth. It's proof that you value yourself enough to not chase validation. And when people see that, they can't help but treat you differently. So remember this, you don't need to shout your worth. You don't even need to argue for it. All you need is to let your silence, your pauses, and your calm presence speak for you. That's how true self-worth is revealed, not in noise, but in quiet strength. If you know the power of a pause that proves your worth, type this in the comments, I know my worth. And keep watching, because while silence reveals your value, it also sets boundaries stronger than any words can. That's exactly what comes next. Number 9. Boundaries spoken without a single word. There's a kind of boundary that doesn't need to be shouted, argued, or written down. It's the one delivered in silence. Because when you stop reacting to disrespect, When you refuse to let others push you into explaining or defending, you're communicating something louder than words ever could. You will not be moved beyond your principles. Let's put this into perspective. Boundaries are only as strong as your ability to enforce them. Most people try to enforce theirs through arguments. They say, "Don't talk to me like that," or "You crossed a line." The problem is that once you're dragged into a back and forth, you're negotiating. And the moment your boundary becomes negotiable, it's already weakened. Silence, on the other hand, makes it non-negotiable. It shows that you don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to prove your line, you live it. Consider David, 52, from Texas. He was dating Laura, 49. Laura had a habit of testing his patience by making comments in front of friends that subtly undermined him. In the past, David would call her out right there, which always escalated into arguments and left him looking defensive. But one evening, when she made a cutting remark about his health, David simply looked at her, paused, and then calmly continued the conversation with someone else. He didn't lash out. He didn't justify himself. He let the silence do the work. Laura felt the difference immediately. Without David reacting, her words didn't land. Instead of making him look small, the silence reflected back on her, making the comment feel cheap. That moment drew a clear line. David wasn't going to play the game anymore. His silence said, "This is not how you treat me." And because he didn't argue, the boundary felt absolute. This is where silence becomes powerful. It removes fuel from the fire. Arguments add oxygen. Silence suffocates disrespect. When you show that you won't respond to certain behaviors, people quickly realize where the line island, and they begin to respect it, even if they don't admit it. The Stoics understood this principle deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When you choose silence in the face of disrespect, you're exercising that power. You're showing that someone else's actions don't dictate your dignity. And that's how you enforce boundaries without lifting your voice. Boundaries spoken in silence also shift how others perceive you. Instead of seeing you as someone who can be provoked into endless explanations, they begin to see you as someone with standards too strong to be broken by words. And ironically, the less you say, the more others listen, because they know that when you do speak, it will matter.